nana zize kuna. Nana zize kuna. Size mani mori jana mani mori komani brete mori. Wali jamanola. Size kuna. Jana kuna. Ture kuna. Wala mani moral di dunia fa dunia. Mo gwala dunia la kenne gwa dunia la dunia. Thank you. Damba, Babona Dala Uloto. Dimazare Jazandamba, Babona Dala Uloto. Dingare Jazandamba, Babona Dala Uloto. Ulola lo Jamafere. felela lindala musal kili alibado mala mali felela lindala musal kili Zandamba, Babona Dara Wuloto. Dimmasaren Zandamba, Babona Dara Wuloto. Dingaren Zandamba, Babona Dara Wuloto. Lola Lo Jamafelam. Farandamba, aye, farandamba, Godiorma, Musabara Balla Kumba Moina, Kunolo Tenamano Banatala, Tadula ke, Sidula ke, Sidula ke, Tadula, Tadula ke, Sidula ke, Sidula ke, Tadula, Tadula ke, Alenga Tadula ke, Kelake, Tolunata, Alenga Tadula. Ayawo mariwoye, ayawo maring, kelonola mariwoye, kelonola mariwo, malambe fuda joya kela mama jangewali. Suma, suma, suma. Suma, 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 suma damba, koi kangu damba ni marandamba. Kori umanga kunu vinda manga kunu koi defanadi damenyala. manola alimala men fazi kuno kutilo kanila men fa man kuno tilo sumayada la vali vadun gadi mo gende gazangel wal jamali banta ayale maring ayawo marwoye kelo no la maring malambe fuda jaya kala mama janke wale
Jim Vrettos is there, I'm here, and the rest of you are in those 4 positions. So, any place in these seats. So we're all mic'd, right? Welcome. How wonderful it is to have you out here for our program. We've called it Occupy the Mind, as you know by now. Did everybody get the card? Do you all have that? Notice that the card has a perforation on it, and that's so that we can have you easily separate the bottom from the top. Then you go home with whatever notes you've made on the top, and also some notes from us about how to continue the conversation using the net. On the bottom is contact information if you wish to connect with us. I am forgetting what the method is for giving those up, but we'll have people at the back as you leave through the doors who are going to receive those things. But let me say a word about the whole idea of what we intend to have happen in terms of the way we're going to function here tonight. I want to remind you that in that very space where Rabbi Michael Lerner is sitting right there, approximately right there in 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King was standing when he offered the famous speech called Beyond Vietnam. In that speech, he called for a true revolution of values. If you've been at an MLK event last week, you may have been hearing that through the past week. A true revolution of values. We feel that the movement called Occupy is also about that, a true revolution of values. But we are not simplistic about it. To have a revolution of values is an extraordinary shift of consciousness in a people. And one element of it is that we become serious in our thinking about what it is in us that resists change. Others too, yes, but ourselves as well. What actually makes it difficult to change? Serious thought about that is needed. That's partly what's going to happen here tonight. There's also serious thought about possibilities. What are the issues? What are the primary matters that will be before us in the next decade, in the next many decades? And how is it that our own resistance can begin to shift and our consciousness open up? These are the desires that were in our minds as we began to frame this program, Occupy the Mind. I will affirm, as I'm sure you've heard it said in many venues, when the mind and the heart are moving together, then the will can follow. But with any of those elements missing, the will is usually stuck. So we're here tonight to do some of this kind of serious thought. I'll leave it to our extraordinary panel to begin to address the kinds of thinking we'll turn to. I do want to say their names. Dr. Serene Jones, President of Union Theological Seminary. Dr. Rick Wolff, Emeritus Professor of Economics from the University of Massachusetts, and currently with the New School. Rabbi Michael Lerner, Rabbi of Beit Tikkun and editor of Tikkun magazine in Berkeley, California. Dr. Cornel West, serving presently with Princeton and soon with Union. Nice work to come home. We'll also have an interlude with Stefan Said singing When We've Heard from our august panel. I want to conclude with a note about the pattern we're going to use for our learning tonight. Learning doesn't work at a high level if we're always listening, only listening to people of intellectual strength is a great opportunity. But if that's all we get to do is just listen, the learning is of a certain kind. I'm very moved, as I'm sure many of you are, by the teaching of Paulo Freire, the pedagogy of the oppressed, that the student-teacher and the teacher-student, you know that concept? That you can't have real learning unless both the teachers and the students are also accepting the other role. So after our panel have spoken to you tonight, we're going to ask you to turn and talk to one another in very small assemblies of 4, maybe 5. Just nobody getting up to mill around unless you happen to be solo in the back and you need to come forward. We're going to have, at that point in our conversation, here expressed on this screen, 2 or 3 kindling questions that are coming out of the conversation with our friends tonight. And we would like you to extend your learning by turning to one another and beginning to listen with curiosity to others in your foursome or your fivesome. And if you get kind of closed out because you're here and they turn that way and they turn that way, well, you might have to move to join a group of 4 or 5 or so. But we want this learning to land in you with your own thinking out loud. And we've invited the panelists to come into the assembly and listen. So they'll be moving around during that 25 or so minutes that you're talking with one another, listening, maybe contributing a thought, but they won't be taking over your group, okay? You're going to be yourselves listening and learning from one another. And I encourage you, if you notice that one of your foursome or fivesome is a little quiet, one of you take the initiative to find out what she thinks. That's an important part of it. Because you're going to have that opportunity, I'm going to ask any of you who might be wondering if this is the night for a people's mic to give it up. Would you be willing to give up no people's mic tonight? If you are willing, please say yes. Thank you. It's important that we have an understanding of the nature of our power and that you have the power to talk and to listen. Tonight won't be the place for people's mic. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Jim Vrettos. I don't see, oh, he went up on high.
Went up on high.
Jim Vrettos from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice will help frame our thoughts tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Many of us here tonight might remember some of the progressive attempts to develop a moral, political, and economic vision of the 1950s and 1960s. Those words ring as true today as they did then. Listen to some of them. We are people of this generation, bred in at least modest comfort, housed now in universities, looking uncomfortably to the world we inherit. We began to see complicated and disturbing paradoxes in our surrounding America. Although mankind desperately needs revolutionary leadership, America rests in national stalemate. Its goals ambiguous and tradition-bound, instead of informed and clear. Its democratic system apathetic and manipulated rather than of, by, and for the people. Feeling the press of complexity upon the emptiness of life, People are fearful of the thought that at any moment things might thrust out of control. They fear change itself, since change might smash whatever invisible thrust framework seems to hold back chaos for them now. Our work is guided by the sense that we may be the last generation in the experiment with living. These words, written in the Port Huron Statement in 1962 by Tom Hayden, Stanley Aronowitz, and a collective group of college students who called themselves Students for a Democratic Society, help give rise to the progressive vision of that period. But their description of reality could easily be mistaken for a call to action by young activists and occupiers today. What these words indicate is that many of the same concerns, interconnections, and insights of the progressives of the 60s still exist and have been manifested in new wars, environmental abuse, racism, genocide, and a general fear-based loss of control worldview today that continues to bedevil the country and the human condition. Hear the words of Martin Luther King at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, November of 1956. I understand you have an economic system in America known as capitalism. Through the economic system, you have been able to do wonders. You've become the richest nation in the world, and you've built up the greatest system of production that history has ever known. All of this is marvelous. But Americans, there is a danger that you will misuse your capitalism. I still contend that money can be the root of all evil. It can cause one to live a life of gross materialism. I'm afraid that many among you are more concerned about making a living than making a life. You are prone to judge the success of your profession by the index of your salary and the size of the wheelbase of your automobile, rather than the quality of your service to humanity. I'm sure many of us in the audience today feel that the system is broken and dysfunctional. We see examples all around us. It can clearly be seen in the general consensus by scientists around the world that the Earth's ecological balance in the next 20 to 50 years will not exist as we know it if present political and environmental policies are not radically changed. Great segments of humankind, numbering perhaps in the tens or hundreds of millions of people, will not survive. It is seen in the depressing data showing that hardline militaristic models have not brought about a more peaceful, less violent world, but instead have shown that with each century, more people are killed through war and war-related injuries in that century than all the previous centuries put together. With each succeeding century, the numbers increase and the trend continues. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists only last week pushed its doomsday clock to 5 minutes to midnight, an indication of the recent research measuring the increasing likelihood of a nuclear holocaust event occurring. Mass incarceration rates have increased more than 8-fold since the late 60s. We now have close to 2.5 million people in jail and prisons around the country. This punitive system has produced a 70% recidivism, or return rate, and is followed by a failed re-entry system, which has created what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, a racial caste system that has made it nearly impossible for millions of people to ever become part of the American mainstream. Drug abuse rates are higher today than after 50 years of a failed war on drugs and the heartless, draconian Rockefeller drug laws. Furthermore, these drug laws have been largely fought on inner-city turf, while data clearly and repeatedly has shown equal or greater drug use in middle-class urban, suburban, and college communities. Police state conditions exist in many poorer communities of color, as police in New York City alone stop and frisk over 600,000 people every year, nearly 2,000 every day. 85% Black and Hispanic, 96% stopped and frisked while simply going about their normal activities of school, work, and church. Homeless shelters are at an all-time high, and rates of economic inequality are at their highest level since the Great Depression. Tens of millions of Americans have given up on the American dream, and millions trying to survive as their homes are foreclosed. And at the same time, we read of our Nobel Peace Prize winning president, who brokers the largest arms deal in history with Saudi Arabia, some $68 billion, and is the head of a military-industrial killing machine that maintains 1.3 million people in the military in dozens of countries and hundreds of bases around the world, producing and selling more arms than all the countries in the world combined. 300,000 of our soldiers have returned home from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars with post-traumatic stress syndromes, and our civil liberties at home become compromised to the core as a bill is signed to authorize indefinite military detention without trial of American citizens. Many of you in the audience may be angry, cynical, depressed, frightened, and increasingly fed up with a system and narrative that is obviously broken and dysfunctional. And yet, there's a profound yearning for change, but confusion about what that change might or could or should be. We look at our leaders and policies from both parties and find them lacking. The right, Republicans, conservatives, and Tea Party groups seem to basically offer more of the same, more military adventures, a foreign and domestic policy based on the fear of the other, a get them before they get us mentality. They want more of the same economic and political policies, particularly in the last 10 years, which has created and perpetuated economic and political advantage for the rich and privileged at the expense of the great masses and a variety of disenfranchised groups in this country and around the world. It means more of the same politicians and political consultants who preach that it's not what you say, it's what people hear. Music to the ears of corporate America, which is all about constructing a phrase that persuades. Liberal, centrist Democrats, and neoliberal groups also seem to be bankrupt and unable to offer much of anything new to meet the profound issues of the day and the future. Chris Hedges has pointed out that for decades, the liberal class was a defense against the worst excesses of power. But the pillars of the liberal class, the press, the universities, labor movements, the culture, the Democratic Party, and liberal religious institutions have collapsed as effective counterweights to the corporate state. In recent years, the conservative right has often been at the forefront of policies and a worldview that advocated wars in Vietnam, Iraq, and elsewhere, and wars on crime, drugs, and terror at home and abroad. But it is often the liberals, neoliberals, and centrist Democrats who carried on these policies and created supposedly more humane ways of achieving the same goals. These leaders who have been characterized as the best and brightest among us have failed us and themselves time after time. The recent history of the war on drugs and crime is a good example of these bipartisan failures. using the Southern strategy, race card, in an attempt to win white votes, the conservative right of the Nixon administration began the most recent war on drugs in the late 60s. The liberal Republican wing during the 70s created the politically vengeful Rockefeller drug laws, culminating in the cold-blooded murder of 38 inmates and correction officers and retaliatory beatings by state troopers and correction officers in the suppression of that Attica prison rebellion of 1971, under the direction of that same liberal Rockefeller. This was followed by continued hardline punitive conservative Reagan years, then a neoliberal Clinton administration which cynically played the law and order political game by disenfranchising felony ex-offenders of their voting rights, their rights to federal housing, food stamps, job training, and access to hundreds of professional and career licenses, thus assuring a permanent underclass of millions. Expansion of the drug war, an attack on civil and privacy rights, and the growth and use of increased military technology and strategies in our domestic police forces has continued at an alarming rate during the conservative Bush and Democratic centrist Obama years. These leaders intellectually know better and often come from our greatest and most prestigious universities. Yet they continue to carry on unwinnable policies of destruction and dehumanization with the technological expertise that has produced millions of deaths and injuries without bringing a safer world. This new generation of master of war surge creators and anti-insurgency technocratic experts use clever phrases to sanitize the killing and persuade us of their policies. Unmanned drone flights, robotic weaponry, collateral damage, technological wars of awe and wonder, treating us as we are all mindless consumers in a vast electronic video game. Their mathematical economic models are used to perpetuate a heartless and cruel economic system where the human pain and suffering is not seen. Corporate media carries on the charade and remains fixated on the next celebrity wedding or trip to rehab. These leaders and policies are operating without a moral compass. Our cynicism and disillusionment grows since we see through their fraud but feel helpless to change it. Sometimes, but rarely, and usually too late after the fact, some of these best and brightest come to realize the lies and moral waste their lives have been. Many of you in the audience may be wondering, where will all this energy and yearning for change go? Does a progressive moral agenda that has anything to say that will make a difference and transform these failed worldviews? We all seem to realize there's something profoundly wrong. What will and could be the response of a progressive moral agenda in these precarious times is the question of the 21st century. And the time has come to clearly and forcefully create that contemporary narrative. Thankfully, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's not rocket science, and we've had traditions and individuals that have been living examples of that progressive moral agenda. What form might this agenda take? It would not be an explicitly religious movement, but would be a spiritual vision that has been in the common wisdom of humanity for much of recorded history. It would emphasize the spiritual values of caring, compassion, nonviolence, love, and perhaps most basic of all, that form of love which is directed to the stranger or the other. It is a spiritual vision that transcends parties, gender, age, class, race, ethnicity, religion, or geographical and community affiliation. We're all intertwined in the wonder of life. And most people do not aspire to militarism, insensitivity to the poor, torture of prisoners, or denial of human rights. Secondly, a progressive moral agenda for the 21st century would respond to contemporary yearnings of people for change by realizing that these struggles are started by ordinary people who create the possibilities for igniting periods of progressive legislation and spiritual creativity. Americans like to feel proud of their experiment and think of their experience as different than others. But if there's any justification for belief in this so-called American exceptionalism, it is rooted in the American Revolution, the abolitionist movement, the labor movement, the Vietnam anti-war movement, the suffragette movement, the welfare rights movement, the civil rights movement, the Attica Rebellion, the Occupy movements, and countless other attempts by ordinary Americans who collectively rose up in anger and hoped to defy authorities by speaking truth to power. Third, the search for this progressive moral agenda should continue its dialogue with academic activists, religious and moral leaders, the media, and public intellectuals who are the ones that need to critique, prod, mobilize, organize, agitate, and help develop the programs and moral energy so that the great masses are better able to be empowered. As Noam Chomsky has pointed out, intellectuals and academics in America today are in a privileged position that should enable them to be the vanguard of change. However, too often they have become apologists for an unjust system. They need to stop hiding in their offices and behind so-called objective research that basically enable ruling elites and policies to continue in their dehumanization. Finally, progressive social scientists must add their insights toward this agenda. Social scientists, activists Richard Cloward and Francis Piven have pointed to a more precise understanding of social movements and the complexity of human behavior by developing an integrated paradigm designed to better explain when and why the breaking of the rules takes the form of collective insurgency and protest. They help us understand the central question of tonight. Where might all this change energy go, and how can it be better channeled into progressive movements? It is the power of the process of becoming a part of a movement that is crucial to a transformative morality, and is exactly what the various Occupy movements have begun to do in raising our consciousness. America is an ongoing living experiment, an experience of complex paradoxes and contradictions. It has tended to be an optimistic culture, at times naive and crude, at other times soaring and liberating. Progressives also tend to be optimists, not only by definition, but because they are deeply grounded in the vision of the possibilities of building a better world. Contemporary progressives can win by fighting for publicly financed elections and bringing an end to a fear-based criminal justice system rooted in punishment and mass incarceration, rather than one based on rehabilitation, human rights, and restorative justice. It can win by offering a plan of action that would include such legislative initiatives as a guaranteed annual income, a national health insurance, and implementation of Roosevelt's Second Bill of Rights, which included rights to a useful job, education, a home, adequate wages, and so on. Ultimately, though, it would be an agenda that would be a force for the power of love in all its liberating and creative energy, sexually, artistically, musically, and a myriad of other forms that has found expression in the beauty and struggles of the human experience throughout history. The hippies and counterculture of the 60s, often ridiculed and sometimes self-destructive and indulgent, did have it fundamentally right. Give peace a chance. All we need is love. Imagine. Make love, not war. Simplistic? Naive? Absolutely. But also absolutely true and absolutely necessary for the healing of a very troubled world. The sooner a progressive moral agenda clearly understands and acts to systematically transform itself and become a true social scientific critically intellectual, political, and spiritual force rooted in the hopes and dreams of everyday people, the sooner it could affect the form change might take. It will have taken the lead to show how to repair and transform future history, the world as it is, and ourselves. It will have then understood the message of America's greatest political and spiritual progressive, Martin Luther King, who in the prophetic words of resistance courageously declared, "I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militarist stairway into the hell of a thermonuclear destruction. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final work in reality. That is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant." Thank you for coming out this evening.
Where do you want to speak from?
Am I mic'd all right?
You are.
I want to thank you, Brother Jim. That was clear and eloquent. Not a whole lot else to say. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. It was Brother Jim's idea to bring us together. I'm so glad that you did. He's also my cellmate on 170th Street in Amsterdam. We went to jail together with Brother Phelps and Brother Carl Dix, Revolutionary Communist Party. I love all three of them. And just to be on the same panel with Serene Jones, who is the visionary and prophetic president of Union Theological Seminary, who will be my boss beginning in July of this year. I cannot wait to return to Union Theological Seminary and work under her leadership. And my dear brother Rick Wolff, of course, who is the most progressive and sophisticated economist who loves poor and working people. I hope you all follow him on WBAI at 12 o'clock on Saturdays every week to get the analysis of global capitalism and how, in fact, we fundamentally transform it. And last but not least is my dear brother Rabbi Michael Lerner, who has been one of the great prophetic voices in the last 45 years, building on and going even beyond the inimitable Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Give him a hand. Give him a hand. Give him a hand. But I intend to be very brief. You all know that we live in one of the most frightening as well as one of the most exciting times. It's frightening because the powers that be, they are hysterical, they are paranoid. They know that for the first time in a long time, the foundations are beginning to shake because the demos, ordinary people, are beginning to wake up and constitute a real threat. Refusing the dominant cultural mode of Tina, there is no alternative. What a lie that is. There is an alternative. We can get beyond the self-medication, get beyond the addiction, and lo and behold, begin to straighten our backs up and courageously organize and mobilize and transform a society in very deep decay, as well as decline, an empire in deep decay and decline, but also a very fragile democratic experiment. Because we want to build on those elements of this democratic experiment. A rule of law that ought to be fair rather than racist and classist and so forth. Rights and liberties that are precious even when truncated by patriotic acts of which there's a bipartisan consensus. Or military-industrial complex with which there is a bipartisan consensus. So it's very, very frightening on the one hand, but exciting. I'm just so glad to be alive at this time because one would have never thought 18 months ago that people would be waking up not just here, but in Greece and Spain and Tunisia, in Egypt and Bahrain and Syria, all around the world. We're tired of the kind of corporate domination of the world, shaping the world in its own image for its own interest, and primarily because I proceed from a fundamental conception of each and every one of us having a dignity and a sanctity, and that poor people are precious, poor people are priceless, working people are precious, working people are priceless, and when you love them, you hate the fact that they're being treated unfairly. That's why I'm glad you ended on love, brother.
Yeah.
Very much so. And that's why I love the prophetic ministry of this church. I stayed here because that's a little bit too close to heaven for an earthbound brother like me. That's not my business, you know what I mean?
Well.
But at the same time, to recognize that as we bring our voices together, there's tremendous tension, tremendous friction. Of course, there's going to be white supremacy and male supremacy and homophobia and class arrogance, even within the movement, even as we fight against it. Why? Because we've been shaped by these. And all can help each other wrestle with these contradictions shot through each and every one of us. But the fact that for the first time since the 1930s, we've got a generation of young people who just told a few researchers that there's a negative association with capitalism. We don't need Brother Rick from Texas, not Rick from New York.
Yeah. We got it.
But Rick from Texas to tell us about vulture capitalism or vampire capitalism or crony capitalism or the ways in which capitalism crushes so many poor and working folk. And it's not just Bane. Bane is just the peak of an iceberg. That's what working and poor people have been wrestling with for the last 30 years or so. But we've got now a younger generation that says when they hear the word socialism, they respond much more positively than when they hear the word capitalism. That's a fundamental shift in consciousness. Now you say, oh, Brother West, what do you mean by socialism? Well, it's true. I've been honorary chair, Democratic Socialist for the last 15 years, and very, very blessed to be a part of that. But you know, we're not a mass movement. That's clear. But by socialism in the eyes of most of our precious young folk of all colors, what they mean is more democracy, more equality, and more freedom. They don't have an obsession with the ism. They just know that this capitalism, as it has been enacted in the last 30 years or so, that they have grown, the period in which they have grown up, tends to be so shot through with a spiritual malnutrition and a moral constipation. And they're tired of it. They want more. They're hungry. They're thirsty for something more. And they're tired of being morally constipated. Because most of them have a sense of what's right, but the greed is so hegemonic it doesn't flow.
Right.
Like The Social Network. You saw that movie, Social Network? Yeah. Oh, there's so much more constipation and spiritual malnutrition, wasn't it? Money, 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 Benjamins, 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 power, 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 women as object of sexual conquest. Yeah, get your billions and still be empty. Get your billions and still be unhappy. Isn't that what Eugene O'Neill told us in The Iceman Cometh? Isn't that what Brother Arthur Miller told us in Death of a Salesman? Isn't that what John Coltrane was trying to tell us in A Love Supreme? We've got voices in our past. That's right. You got to use the Sankofa bird to acknowledge the best of the past as we move forward. That's why Tony Krishna is so preoccupied with O'Neill and Miller or August Wilson or Lorraine Hansberry and others. And we have a moment now with this deep democratic awareness escalating. People willing to put their hearts, minds, and bodies on the line and connect it to democratic enlightenment. If you have a little time, take a look at Jonathan Israel's third volume in his trilogy on democratic enlightenment. It was an international movement. It was a global movement. He's a deeply secularist and monistic brother, preoccupied with Spinoza. That's all right, but we understand that's a crucial voice among other voices. We are experiencing once again, and after 150 years or so, a global democratic awareness and enlightenment, and it resulted then in a democratic revolutions all around the world. Listen to Beethoven's Ninth, critical of the Congress of Vienna. Listen to Schiller. Listen to those at that moment, and then come to 21st century and say, oh, lo and behold, what will our democratic revolution look like? Rethinking empire, rethinking nature, rethinking sexual orientation, recognizing that class is still very much at the center of it because the monopolies and the oligarchs and the plutocrats are still in the driver's seat. And in American history, I'm going to end on this, we've had two revolutions, we need three. The first one was against the British Empire after they had so viciously mistreated our precious indigenous brothers and sisters. stole their land, crushed their babies. Now they're talking about revolution. I was just with the Occupy the Court down in Gainesville, Florida. We had indigenous brothers and sisters there. Somebody talked about liberty or die. Patrick Henry, yes, against the British imperialists. Against the indigenous peoples, no. Enslaved Africans, no. Just liberty for some. But that was still a great movement against imperialism. It was a guerrilla movement. It was violent. Our second revolution, 1861 to 1865, was against slavery. If it wasn't for the 200,000 black soldiers who joined the Union Army, we wouldn't have broke the back of white supremacist U.S. slavery in the country. The second revolution. You read Brother Eric Foner's masterpiece on this. He teaches right across the street. Another good reason to come back to New York. All this good stuff going on here. Well, I love Princeton too, but it's time to go. I don't want people to think because I love New York I don't love Princeton, you know what I mean? But the third moment is our moment. We've had a revolution against monarchy, revolution against slavery. Martin Luther King Jr. was dealing with slavery by another name called American terrorism, called Jim Crow. He was completing that revolution. That's why I don't even call it a civil rights revolution. It was simply an acknowledgement that black people are human. Now, for some people, that's a new idea. I grew up with it, not new at all. People see a brilliant black president. I had so many brilliant black folk in my church, in my community. That's not new. I know a whole lot of Negroes could have been president. Whole lot of them. I'm glad he's there. I'm glad he's there as opposed to the alternative. But the question is for him, just like it is for all of us, where do you stand in this present moment where we talk about the expansion of democracy in which oligarchy or plutocracy is now the question? Which side do you stand? 42% of the profits in the nation linked to banks. 30 years ago, it was about 12%. It's no longer monopoly industrial capitalism, monopoly finance capitalism. It's bank-driven instead of generating jobs. Let's say Brother Mitt Romney, our reactionary Mormon brother, he made money making deals. His father made money with workers making cars. He was the CEO of GM. Look at the difference. Even when the capitalists making money then, they were producing something. Now these bankers making billions of money, speculation. No translation even in the production of things that provide some kind of service to everyday ordinary people. Oligarchy is now at the center. It is the dominant issue in Greece. It's the dominant issue in the EU. It's the dominant issue in America. It's the dominant issue in Latin America. And of course we all are against male supremacy and anti-Jewish hatred, and anti-Arab hatred, and anti-Muslim hatred, and the hatred against our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters and so forth. But oligarchy now, like slavery and monarchy then, looms at the center. And that's one of the reasons why we're so disappointed with the election, with the two parties. Republican Party, conservative version of oligarchic rule. Democrats, neoliberal version of oligarchic rule. Both parties tied to oligarchic rule. Oh, but the neoliberal version is so much better. Obama is so much better than the Republicans. Yes, that's true. That's true. That's true. But even what he has to offer is oligarchic rule. And working and poor people, an afterthought unless we organize, mobilize, bring power and pressure to bear. And so first it affects the rhetoric. We're going to hear it tomorrow night. Or was it Tuesday night? At the State of the Union? First we're going to hear the lie. The State of the Union is in good shape. That's not true. It's a lie. You don't have 1 out of 2 of your population living in or near poverty and say the State of the Union is in good shape. It's just the routine. But at the same time, they recognize that the pressure of the Occupy movement is such. You watch, all of a sudden they're going to say something about income inequality. The last State of the Union, our dear brother Barack Obama didn't mention the word poor or poverty. The first time a president has not mentioned the word poor or poverty since 1948. Did you listen on Tuesday? He's going to say something. He's got good spinsters. And he probably believes it too, but he's a politician. Still tied to Wall Street. He's got Tim Geithner still running things. He's got Jacob Lew just taking over chief of staff right out of Citigroup again. Here comes another one. And talk about Lawrence Summers being appointed head of the World Bank. Oh my God. Change, you can believe it. But it's not about Brother Barack. Because we love the brother. We protect him against white supremacists who want to trash him or kill him. We respect the brother. He's in a tough situation. But we going to correct that brother out of intense love, care, because it's not just about him. And I end with a note. The brother Tavis Smiley and I just finished a book called The Rich and the Rest of Us, a poverty manifesto having to do with the eradication of poverty. Abolitionist voices as part of occupation. Poverty across the board, no matter what color, what culture, what civilization, what sexual orientation, beginning with moral and spiritual, to make it a moral and spiritual issue that leads us to engage in our critique of oligarchy. And I do, in fact, consider myself a revolutionary Christian. And Christian is the noun, not the adjective. That's very important. But by revolutionary, what I mean is what Brother Martin meant. When he said not only a revolution in priorities and in values, but a transfer of power from oligarchs and plutocrats to those Sly Stone called everyday people, to those James Cleveland called ordinary people. And it's going to take a nonviolent, democratic, protracted revolution for that. And we need to talk about the language of revolution connected to love and justice, not connected to revenge and bigotry. That there is a conception of revolution that is necessary and indispensable, but is not tied to trashing people and hating people. I love oligarchs. I hate oligarchy. Because they can choose to fight against oligarchy. Just like I love white brothers and sisters, but I hate white supremacy. And white brothers and sisters can choose to fight against white supremacy. Let me stop there.
Dr. Jones, an opportunity to put a question to Dr. West.
Just have to breathe for a minute.
Let's get her out in front of you, Mr.
Absolutely.
James, so we can see Dr. Serene Jones.
Good. Okay.
Pull this table this way.
Good.
There we go.
So Cornel, in light of what you've just described, why be at a seminary?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, I'm partly coming back to Union just for my own soul. You know what I mean? Because I'm almost 60 years old. I've lived 3 lifetimes in one life. I should have been dead 15, 20 years ago. And so I'm coming back for my own soul. I started at Union when I was 23 years old. And it's an arc of a life that's coming to an end to be able to return to where I started. And because my primary identity in the world is that of a Jesus-loving free black man, a prophetic Christian, to be in a context where I can have a much more robust and uninhibited commitment to the life of the mind and Christian prophetic witness is something that I longed for in the last few years or so. And to be able to do that in a place like Union, which is the exemplary, the grand institutional expression of that identity of being a prophetic Christian. Now, of course, we've got our Muslim sister coming in. It's going to be quite magnificent. We got JTS, our Jewish brothers and sisters, right across the street. We're going to wrestle with them because they got prophetic voices over there as well. And then you got Columbia University, and then you got Harlem. You got 125th Street. And the things that have sustained me in life have been family, faith, friends, and the music. And Princeton is just a little too far from the music.
May we hear from you, Serene?
Yes, it's one of the real challenges is not just following you, but now following Cornel. I feel like the way in which, as a seminary president, I have been reflecting on these issues is so close to the bone in the ground of the Occupy movement itself and what I am seeing unfold at Union Theological Seminary. What I thought I would talk about this evening is, as a theologian and as a person involved in theological education, the pressing question that is always at the forefront of our thinking is a very simple question. How do we understand the big meaning frame, the big story within which these actions are unfolding? How do we read the cosmology of it all? What story is being told about, and it's simple, about who we are as human beings and how it is we should organize our collective life together? Very simple questions with complex answers. And standing in a theological tradition, it's not a complicated answer to find one in the heart of Christianity. What are human beings? We are these radically equal creatures. We are radically equal, and secondly, the call of our lives is to figure out how to organize our social life in such a way that that equality is manifest in our institutions and in the conditions that constitute the terms of our flourishing. And one of the most interesting things to see close to the ground with Occupy Wall Street is the way in which those two questions are being grappled with and answered. What I want to talk about are 4 surprises that I have encountered in my own wrestling with what is happening with Occupy in terms of how, as an activist coming out of the 70s and 80s, as a student who studied Marxism with this group here, as a person who had an understanding of capitalism and colonialism and a global empire, and a certain way of standing how social change happens. What's happening now close to the ground. And the first is this: at Union Theological Seminary, we have 45 students who are occupiers. And from the start of the movement, we gave everything we had to support them. Banners, gave them courses in nonviolent resistance, talked about rights. I mean, just sort of how do you make a school turn into a grand classroom where this movement is what is engaged and reflected on. Coming out of my own past, though, I watched this happen and the energy at Union grow and grow and grow as the semester unfolded, and I began to think, okay, with these really righteous students, how long is it going to take before the tensions start building internal to the community? And people are going to be saying, well, you're just so righteous about this, you know, but you're not paying attention to our questions. You're not doing what really matters, studying for the ministry in some abstracted sense, or dealing with another complex of social issues. What was surprising to me is that never happened. And that didn't happen because the students involved not only had an ideology of inclusion, but I noticed they have a disposition of inclusion. And there was never, in the conversations we had, a self-righteousness or a sense of sort of drawing a boundary around correctness that came into the conversation. So what does it mean to move from an ideology of inclusion to a disposition of inclusion when it comes to how we understand a social movement? The second surprise that I have had has to do with the reading of Global Capitalism. I just came back from Los Angeles, where I had the opportunity, as I often do as the president of Union, to stand in a circle of the 1%, really the 1% of the 1%, at a funeral of a friend, reflecting on this issue. I asked them, I'm going to speak at Riverside Church on Sunday night about Occupy Wall Street. What do you think? What should I say? What, you know, hold up my microphone. And what would you say? And 2 responses came immediately. One was, a man smiled and he says, you know, I think it's just great. He says, I don't care that there's no specific answers out there. He says, it's an expression that the thing is broken And he says, we all know it's broken. We don't know what we're doing, but nobody is fixing it. This guy was a Republican. The second man I spoke with said, okay, I think it's not that hard to fix. We just need to get the regulators to actually enforce the laws that we have, the regulations that we have on the books, and make simple decisions that people in the SEC should not necessarily be also lobbyists and participants in the things that they're regulating. Not a complicated thing, and yet it hasn't happened. Secondly, rethink the basic tax structure. Thirdly, put limits on pay, and so he went through them. He said, if we just did those things, we wouldn't have a problem. Now, what that signaled to me is that we are going to be able to go a long ways if we are successful in this movement to addressing some of these issues and still not address the issue of class, the deep issue that's in all of this. And you could see already in this mind and this conversation a way of reconfiguring capitalism, making it more democratic, and yet still not shifting the 99% and the 1%. Third, the surprise has been to me, in the context of the university and of my long history in the academy, the degree to which scholars and academics are frighteningly absent from this conversation. That we have, in one way, thinking economically about the 99 and the 1%, we have in higher education an entire institution that has constituted itself as the 1%. And that has to do in many ways with the sort of institutions that we put into higher education to create contexts in which people's daily lives are not tied intimately to the economic realities around us in the most elite institutions. And then we have the 99% of the adjuncts and of the professors who never find jobs doing the labor of the academy. Until that conversation comes into the heart of those institutions, then when it comes to the kind of analysis we need to think ahead, we're not going to have it. Fourthly, and this is perhaps the one that has been the most surprising to me, and that is the role that, in moving forward, ritual plays. I'll never forget an evening, early October, came up out of Rector Square, stop on the number 1 subway, stepped into the early evening light, and there on the street, in front of me, I saw the closing down for the day of the memorial for 9/11. And in that context, you could hear the water running and have a sense of being very near sacred ground and near a place in a time of catastrophic collapse in which we were confronted so brutally and so closely with the evil and the harm and the violence that human beings are possible. And a mere block away, you could hear, with the water falling over here, the drums of Occupy. And just this steady beating. As you got closer, it was the drums of life. And what those drums were doing was creating, as much as anything, a kind of sacred space called hope. And calling us to think of that hope as not something in the far future, but something that is, in a sense, with those drums, primal. So that it's a calling forward by calling back. And this is what I think is interesting for engaging the question of social movements in the present moment, is those drums were as much about awakening bodies and giving shape and form to hope at the unconscious level, at the way in which our tissue and our muscles and our bones and our desires hold that place that we're going, as it does at this point getting correct some sort of policy statement or ideological frame within which to hold it. Because the world right now is cracking open. And along with that cracking open is a cracking open of the most profound paradigms that we use to hold it. And as long as we keep digging into the bedrock of those paradigms looking for that future, we're not going to find them. And at this moment, it seems it's a rare opportunity for us to hear that water, to hear those drums, to see those students standing on no self-righteous ground, and in all of that mix, to find the heart of where we're going.
Michael, perhaps you'd put a question to Serene.
Yeah, okay. Well, we at Tikkun and the network of spiritual progressives have been talking about using Passover and Easter as a way to take the religious wisdom of the Jewish and Christian world and connect it to what's happening right now, since in each of them there's an affirmation of hope, of possibility, and of transformation. I wonder, so we've started to talk about to do a Seder for the 99%, and I'm wondering if you might be able to put to the people who teach as well as the people who study at Union the possibility of developing a Christian or Easter celebration for the 99%.
That's very fascinating. I mean, what you have in both of those ritual moments is an affirmation not just of an idea about hope and where we're going, but they're both very physical moments. I mean, It's about food, it's about dead bodies, it's about hope. Both of them are sort of more than a simple set of ideas can hold them. And I think that's what's very interesting to pay attention to. What do we do about the motions of them? You know, I think that it's great to have a Seder and have Easter in which the 99% are at the fore of our thinking. But in both traditions, you would never have a ritual space that was closed off in any way whatsoever. So the target would be thinking about how this applies to the economic inequalities that are breaking the back of our community. Not that the ritual is for a certain group of people.
Great. Is it permissible for me to ask people to stand and move a little bit before I start to talk?
It is. We have enough time if one of you wanted to put another question if you want to take another question. There's enough just before we turn to you, and then you have the permission to do whatever you want to guide the body to do.
Okay.
But, Cornel, another question perhaps for Serene. Put you on the spot.
No, I think she said it so beautifully and insightfully.
She said it perfectly.
I'm ready to march and fight, yeah.
Michael.
Okay.
Beat those drums,
Would you like us to do?
Yeah, I would like to ask you to stand for a second, stretch out your bodies. You're hearing a lot of words. I want to teach you a song and then ask you to sing a song you know. Okay? Okay, so it goes like this. You can stretch out there. And here's the song. It goes like this. The words are like this. Let everyone neath her vine and fig tree live in peace and unafraid. You want to say those words? Let everyone neath her vine and fig tree live in peace and unafraid.
Everyone.
Mic check. Let everyone neath her vine and fig tree live
in fig tree.
Live in peace and unafraid.
Live in peace and unafraid.
And into plowshares. Beat their swords.
Beat their swords.
Nations shall learn war no more.
Nations shall learn war no more.
Okay, so yeah, I've been very involved in Occupy San Francisco and Occupy Oakland, and this sometimes energizes people. So I'll sing the melody 3 times. By the second or third time, you'll get it. Please join me. It goes like this. Let everyone neath her vine and fig tree live in peace and unafraid. Let's try that. Let everyone neath her vine and fig tree live in peace and unafraid. Let's try it again. Let everyone neath her vine and fig tree live in peace and unafraid. Second part. and into plowshares beat their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. Try that. And into plowshares beat their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. Once more. And into plowshares beat their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. Let's start from the beginning. Let everyone, and actually you can move your body a little bit. Let everyone, neither vine and fig tree, live in peace and unafraid. Let everyone, neither vine and fig tree, live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares beat their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares beat their swords. Nations shall learn war no. Once more, let everyone, neither vine and fig tree, live in peace and unafraid. Let everyone, neither vine and fig tree, live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares beat their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares beat their swords. Nations shall learn war no more. Now, arms around each other, and we'll song that you know. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield. Way down.
Down by the riverside.
Way down.
Down by the riverside.
Way down.
Down by the riverside.
I'm gonna lay
down
my sword and shield. Way down. Down by the riverside. Study war no more. I ain't gonna study
war no more.
I ain't gonna study
war no more.
I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more.
Oh, that was beautiful, brother.
Okay.
That was beautiful.
Do you mind if I stand? Okay, yeah, I feel better standing. So we know we have tremendous support in this room for ideas of fundamental transformation. It's terrific to be with you. It's terrific to be with you. It's terrific to be with brothers and sisters who are sharing in that kind of a vision. We need, in order to move forward, we need to figure out how to bring the people of this country into this room. I want to be in a reality in which it's clear to everyone, for example, that at least minimally there should be a representative of the views that are articulated here running in the Democratic primaries against President Obama, not to destroy him, but to consolidate the voices of a progressive alternative. My primary candidate for that, Cornel West. Okay.
All right, I told you.
But what we're up against is that although the ideas that are articulated here are ones which I believe would be responded to by tens of millions of people, at the same time, most people in this society have a part of them that says, these ideas are beautiful, but they're unrealistic and they'll never happen, so forget it and be realistic and act according to the way the real world is. And this reflects a struggle that's been going on for at least the past several thousand years between two worldviews. The worldview that, on the one hand, I call the worldview of fear. And it says something like this: human beings are thrown into this world by ourselves. We find ourselves surrounded by people who are seeking power and control and to maximize their own advantage without regard to the consequences for others. And they will do what it takes to maximize their power, even if it means subordinating you. In such a world, with that worldview, people then return to what they think of as reality and say, if I want to protect myself and my own interests, there's only one way to do it. I've got to get power and control over them before they get power and control over me. Now, this worldview has been around for thousands of years. It's the worldview of fear. It's the worldview of power over. It's the worldview of domination. It's a worldview which has become particularly intense in the past 300 years as the global capitalist economy became more and more infused into the consciousness of most people. Because day after day in the world of work, people actually experience themselves surrounded by others who themselves believe that their only opportunity for safety, security, economic well-being is to dominate and control others before others get to dominate and control them. So the war of all against all is internalized as the ontological truth, the nature of reality, that everybody wants power and domination. And consequently, the politics that emerges is a politics that goes across Republican and Democratic lines, and it says that the way to achieve security for yourself, your city, your country, homeland security, is through domination and control. The worldview of fear, power over, and it's a worldview that leads to a war of all against all in the work world, and also leads people to say, when some people have more power than others, oh, well, that's just human nature. It's just how it is. And what I have to do is accommodate myself to it and work hard at it. Now, on the other hand, there's another worldview. And that worldview says, you know, most of us didn't come into the world all by ourselves. Many of us came into the world through a mother. And your mother gave you an amount of love and caring that made it possible for you to survive. It made it possible for you to thrive as an infant. And let me tell you, your mother did not have a reasonable expectation of a good return on her investment of time and energy in you. Now, some people have said to me when I've said this before, Rabbi Lerner, you don't know my mother. And so I'll stipulate anybody who wants to say that your mother was neurotic in this way or that way or the other way. But I want to tell you that most people have the experience of that loving as a start to their way of experiencing the world. And from that comes a different worldview, a worldview that says that safety and security, that both on the individual and on the communal level, can happen through love, caring, and generosity. And that we can build a world that is based on love, caring, and generosity that will give us even more effective security and protection than through domination and control. Now, most people have heard both worldviews, and most of us are on a continuum between the worldview of fear and the worldview of hope, the worldview of domination and the worldview of generosity and love. And where we are at any given moment is partly a product of our childhood experiences. That is, how long did that love go on? How much was it complicated by other neurotic dimensions? How much was it sustained in our relationship with other children as we went through school? Then our adult life experiences. How much did we meet other people who saw us as fundamentally valuable versus how much did we encounter other people in our adult life who were essentially using us for their own means, and so we got to distrust them and feel that we really couldn't trust the world. Third, how much of what worldviews have we inhabited and imbibed? What have we been taught in the universities? How much have we bought what the media teaches us? How much did our religious world or our spiritual world give us ideas about that validated either domination or love? And finally, where is the social energy moving? Because at any given moment, social energy either moves towards fear or towards hope. And that alternation makes a great deal of difference, because when the social energy moves towards fear, for example, after 9/11, then more of the voices in our own head that believe the worldview of fear start to come out, and we think that the commentators and the novelists and the authors and the poets, the political leaders who articulate and base themselves on the worldview of fear, and that can be the David Brooks and the Tom Friedmans and so forth. These start to sound like profound people. But when the social energy moves more towards hope, then more and more of the voices that we've heard about the possibility of a world based on love, kindness, and generosity start to sound very important and significant. And so we can recognize any of these people on the panel as great and deep thinkers, because the energy has allowed us to retrieve those voices. So a great deal about politics, I would say to you, I urge you to use this alternation to understand, whenever you look at a political speaker, whenever you read a column, whenever you see a movie or a television show, read a poem, ask yourself always about any political or cultural reality, does this tend to move people more towards fear or more towards hope? Which of those two? Because the more it moves towards fear, the more it will inevitably reverberate in the position that the ideas that we've talked about here tonight are sweet but unrealistic. And so we now have to ask ourselves, how do we build a movement that can build a hope, can sustain hope, can make it plausible to people to believe in a world based on kindness and generosity? Because so many voices in their head are saying, well, very nice, but it'll never happen, it's impossible, it's unrealistic. This morning I talked about how a God conception, a God of transformation and healing, is a potential contributor to building that world of hope and love. And in my new book, Embracing Israel-Palestine, I tried to show you how that conflict could be solved if we could move the social energy more towards the possibility of trusting in the possibility of love, caring, kindness, and generosity, and less stuck in the trauma that believes that people will always only seek to dominate and control. But let me tell you, in our organization, the network of spiritual progressives, we have tried to develop a way of talking about this. The shorthand is we say, and we've been down in Occupy Oakland and Occupy San Francisco, and saying, here, you want a 5-second line about what we're about? We're about the caring society, caring for each other and caring for the earth. You want a little bit longer and more complicated and sophisticated, we say we want a new bottom line in this society. Today, institutions, social practices, government policies, corporations, our legal system, our political system, our healthcare system, our educational system get to be judged efficient, rational, and productive to the extent that they maximize money and power. And we are saying, no, we need a new bottom line that says, that's the old bottom line. The new bottom line says, sure, those things are relevant, but also you must judge things to be efficient, rational, and productive to the extent that they maximize love and caring, kindness and generosity, ethical and ecological sensitivity, enhance our capacities to respond to other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, and enhance our capacity to stop looking at the nature and the physical world around us in terms of what we can get out of it. Can we turn it into a commodity? Can we turn it into a new product to sell? But instead to respond to the universe with awe and wonder and radical amazement at the grandeur of creation. Now that's a new bottom line. That's a new bottom line. And I believe that if you articulated that new bottom line in a serious way in this society, a huge number of people across all the existing political boundaries would say, yeah, I want that, I want that, I want that. So how does that then translate into politics? Well, in the network of spiritual progressives, and here I want to invite you to consider joining, even if you never thought of yourself as spiritual before, because if you agree with the new bottom line, you're a spiritual progressive. Even if you don't have to believe in God, you don't have to believe in religion, But you're a spiritual progressive if you want a world based on love and caring and kindness and generosity. So how does that translate into politics? Well, we have two things that we've introduced into Congress. The first is called the Global Marshall Plan, introduced into Congress by Keith Ellison of Minneapolis, the chair of the Progressive Caucus of the Congress. He said, and that the Global Marshall Plan says we need, number one, to dedicate 1 to 2% of the gross domestic product of the United States each year for the next 20 to once and for all end domestic and global poverty, homelessness, hunger, inadequate education, inadequate health care. And we can do it. That's the Global Marshall Plan. The second specific is we've introduced the ESRA because people say, well, how will you ever get that to happen given who's in the Congress right now? The ESRA, the Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment, says that number one, it overturns Citizens United. But number two, but let me say, as much as I support that, it's way too limited to just overturn Citizens United. It only brings us back to 2010. And 2010 and all before it, still money was running politics. So we need to go further, and the ESRA says eliminate all private and corporate money from elections totally. Nobody can give money. Instead, elections get funded primarily by the government, and media corporations must give free and equal time to all the major candidates, and you cannot buy any other time. Okay, so that takes away from the possibility of our government money for elections going into these media moguls. Okay, so get money out of politics entirely. Go for the whole vision. Number two, it says let corporations have a profit of an income of more than $100 million a year. We're not talking about small little corporations. We're not talking about mom and pop operations. We're not even talking about middle size. We're talking about corporations that have $100 million in income per year or more, must get a new corporate charter once every 5 years, and they can only get that, and here we're dealing with the problem of the rotation from the regulatory agencies that go right from the people that are supposed to be regulating, sit on those regulatory agencies. So how are we going to get them they have to prove a satisfactory history of environmental and social responsibility to a jury of ordinary citizens. Get it? Trust ordinary citizens to decide whether this corporation, and let people who are who have experienced the impact of that corporation in their lives, any place in the United States or any place in the world, to come and testify to that jury about whether that corporation has been environmentally and socially responsible, and you've got a significant step towards democratization of the economy. It is not yet socialism, but it is a huge advance because it creates a condition in which many good people in corporations who go home and say, yeah, I'm going to give money to the Sierra Club. I know what we're doing is terrible, but I have to do it because we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors, to come back and say, okay, now I've got to tell our investors that we have to be more environmentally and socially responsible. Otherwise, we're going to lose all your money because we're going to not be able to continue as a corporation. So create that. And thirdly, we call for, as part of the ESRA, calling for a requirement on environmental education at every level, from kindergarten through graduate school, every level for people to learn about the environment and how to save it. But saving the environment is not just about technical knowledge. It's also about how do we learn to cooperate with each other? How do we recognize the fundamental truth of the 21st century, which is that our well-being depends on the well-being of everyone else on the planet and the well-being of the planet as well. That's the critical information. And that's why love, caring, and kindness and generosity are not just some silly spiritual truth. They are the fundamental survival requisites of the 21st century. And our task is to let people know that we believe it. I'm asking you to come out of the closet as a spiritual progressive. I'm asking you to talk about love and caring and kindness and generosity, to overcome the technocratic language that often dominates in the liberal and left world, and that people turn off because the first thing they think is, hey, I didn't do so well in economics in high school. I didn't do so well in mathematics in high school. I don't know what they're saying. I just got to feel that, how are they addressing my heart? Address the heart. Talk about the fundamental yearning that people have for meaning and purpose in their lives, for something that transcends the ethos of the capitalist marketplace, that connects them to higher purpose, and the fundamental yearning that people have to be recognized and seen as fundamentally valuable, not for what they will produce and not for what they will do for you, but fundamentally because just as human beings, they deserve to be loved and cared for. A progressive movement that can project that kind of a message and embody it in the way we treat each other is a progressive movement that can't be stopped. Thank you.
No.
You're hitting, bro. You're hitting, man. You're hitting. That's strong. That's strong.
Rick, you have a question for...
Yes, Michael, can you say something about what you feel is the extent of the contribution the Occupy movement in its short few months of existence may have made to the shift of focus from the one worldview to the other?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why I've been down there day after day, and it was so incredible to march down to that Oakland port and shut down the port and to raise the issues, is that the Occupy movement, in formulating it as 1%, the 1% and the 99%, and I totally agree with you that we have to affirm the humanity of the 1% as well. But we don't have to affirm the policies that represent the interests of the 1%, even as we affirm their humanity. But what that Occupy movement did on the one level was help people see their unity, because unfortunately, too much of what people do on the left is they have 98% agreement on everything, and all they focus on is the 2% that they disagree about. And so by talking about the 99%, suddenly people felt, wow, I'm part of something powerful and potentially transformative. But the second thing that Occupy movement did was it showed that people who want to fight for what seemed like an unrealistic vision to change the fundamental discourses of this country so that we are now no longer talking, as we were 6 months ago, about the deficit, but as my brother and my beloved one, Cornel, had said, that you're able now to have a different discourse in the country, and what that shows is a key notion. Don't be realistic. Don't be realistic. It was totally unrealistic to think 6 months ago that things could be changed in the public discourse so much. And anybody who knew politics would have told you, forget it, don't go for it. Because you have to contain yourself and within the framework of what the people who have power in the media, in the politics, including our own dear liberal Democrats, are telling us is realistic. Don't be realistic. Spend your life going for your highest vision of the good, and the Occupy movement has helped validate that for us.
I have the dubious distinction of being a professional economist, a profession which has distinguished itself, I am sad to say, by having almost nothing to say about the cataclysms we're living through, simply out of embarrassment that it was not supposed to happen according to their theory, and therefore, as so many good professors, if it wasn't supposed to happen, then it didn't. And I assume my illustrious colleagues on this panel invited me in part so I could bring to you a different economics perspective. I'm going to try to do that in a short amount of time by tying together a number of themes everyone touched on. The theme of our economic
problems, divisions, the theme of capitalism, and above all, the theme of what a moral agenda for the future ought to look like. Let me begin by reminding you of an earlier moment like this, in fact, two of them, in our country's history from which we can learn. In the struggle against slavery in the 19th century, American slavery, you might divide the people who found slavery awful into two groups. One group was horrified by how slaves were treated, how they were fed, clothed, their families broken up, beaten, all of that. And they devoted themselves to a struggle to improve the condition of the slaves. Better diets, better clothing, keep their families together. And then there was a second group of people who were horrified not only by slavery, but by the first group of those who opposed it. They looked at their brothers and sisters in that other movement, and they said, "You're missing the most powerful and basic moral issue of the time. The problem is not how we treat the slaves. The problem is that there are such a thing as slaves." When they were pushed to explain their upset, they made a further argument, and you're going to see how I use it in a minute for our times today. The further argument they made was, even if you and we struggle to improve the diet, the clothing, the housing, and so on of slaves, as long as they remain slaves, whatever we win can and probably will be taken away by the master in the future, just as it was taken away by the master in the past, which is why the solution is not improving their situation, but transforming it into something utterly different. Now move forward with me to our present system, which isn't slavery, it's capitalism. There is no way out of a discourse, of a discussion of capitalism. And as the others have pointed out, not the least of the contributions of the Occupy movement has been to put this issue of capitalism on the agenda of American discourse again. And that is an extraordinary achievement. For 50 years, half a century, it has basically been impossible to discuss in a reasonable and rational way the institution of capitalism as an economic system. If you discussed it in the United States, you had to effectively become a cheerleader. Discourse, criticism was akin to disloyalty. It became impossible or very dangerous to go there. This movement has put it on the agenda. Over the last 50 years, we as a nation debated our educational system, criticized and debated it, our transportation system, our medical system, our welfare system, and on, but not our economic system. Oh yes, we could complain a little bit that wages should be a bit higher, that people shouldn't be thrown out of their homes by foreclosure. This should sound familiar to you. We were worrying, and we still worry, about the conditions of the working people of America, like we might have been upset about the conditions of the slaves back in the Old South. But then there has to be a moral voice coming up and saying, the issue isn't whether workers' wages should be higher, their job conditions better, their security of work higher. There's a deeper and more profound moral problem, and that's the problem of the capitalist system. And let me explain briefly what I mean. I don't mean who owns things. And I don't mean whether we have a market or a planning system. If you look at most economies in the world, they're mixtures of those things anyway. I'm talking about the capitalist way of organizing how we produce the goods and services that most of us work on most of our adult lives and that we all depend on for our food, our clothing, our shelter, and everything else we do. We organize that in a way that has to be a question and an issue for a moral agenda. And I want to end by making a plea to put it on a moral agenda in the following terms. We organize the production of goods and services in the United States in an extraordinary capitalist way. It's normal to capitalism. I want to raise it as a moral issue. We go to work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, most of us. We walk into a workplace in which we are told what to do, how to do it, and when we're done using our brains and muscles to work with tools provided to us, on raw materials set before us, in ways dictated to us, when we're done pouring our creativity into our work, it's 5 o'clock. We are told to go home, and what we have produced stays there. And for those of us who don't understand that, who have, like a young child, the desire to take home what we have made, they send people in dark blue uniforms to our homes and they hurt us. My point is not just, although it's important, that there's a moral question about whether human beings who collectively and cooperatively produce the wealth of a society are unable to participate in the decisions as to what is done with what they have produced. That is a profound moral question. It ought to be part of our national discourse. But that's not my primary point. Here's my primary point, because it touches the economic crisis we're in. For the last 30 years, for those of you not familiar with the statistics of the society we live in, for the last 30 years, the real wages, the amount of stuff an average American gets per hour of his or her labor, has not changed. The real wage per hour or per week of an American worker today, the money you get adjusted for the prices of the things you pay for, is about what it was in 1978. The only way the consumption level of the American people has risen in 30 years is by two acts the American people decided to take to cope with the end of rising wages, because they had risen in America for 150 years before that, before the 1970s. The first thing American workers did was work more hours. The working class of the United States today does more hours of paid labor per year than the working class of any other country in this planet. We are working ourselves to death. The second thing the American working class did to keep its consumption going, when working more hours wasn't enough, when sending women, old people, and teenagers out to work wasn't enough, was to go on a borrowing binge, the likes of which the world had never seen before. That plastic credit card you have in your wallet was put there in the 1970s. Before that, the masses had no credit card, in order to get you into the levels of debt that now keep you up at night. The American working class, therefore, is now exhausted from its work conditions, which are a product of the capitalist system in which we live. But over the last 30 years, since the 1970s, while the wages were flat, the productivity of the American working class kept rising. We worked harder. We were better educated. We had more machines, we had better machines, and we had computers. So for 30 years, while what we got in wages was flat, what we produced for our employers kept rising. You do not need a PhD in economics, although I have that. You don't need it to understand if what the employer gives you is flat for 30 years, but what you give the employer goes up for 30 years, it's bad news for you and good news for them. Now the last part. Those employers, who are now a very small number of our people, my goodness, you might even say, oh, I don't know, 1%. Those 1% are not stupid. They understood that becoming as wealthy as these 30 years made them, when the rest of the society couldn't go there and was getting deeper into debt and exhausted, that you better control the political system, otherwise the people who are falling behind will try to use the political system to cope with their situation. So why are we surprised if in this system that makes 1% so wealthy, they should use a portion of their wealth to make sure that politics keeps them where they are? Of course they would, of course they did, and we live with the consequences. Last part. This is the second major economic crisis of Western capitalism in 75 years. We are now in the 5th year. The official start of this economic downturn, as declared by the National Bureau of Economic Research, which keeps records, was December of 2007. Count it. We are in the 5th year, and there's no end in sight. The last time we were in a situation as dire as this was the Great Depression of the 1930s. And here's the most profound moral lesson about our history since then. In the depths of that depression, when the official unemployment rate was 25%, 2.5 times what it is now, when people said even more strongly then than they do now, there's no money to help people, we have to cut back. We have to cut back. A movement arose from below in America. The Congress of Industrial Organizations, the most powerful union organizing wave ever to sweep across America, bigger than anything that had happened before, bigger than anything that has happened since. Millions of American workers in months across the major industries. Powerful socialist and communist parties in the United States. I'm reminded, just to give you an idea of what could happen. Not only were there a communist party, but it was strong here in New York and up here in the Upper West Side. And you even had a communist party put forward an African-American man to run for the City Council of New York, and because we had proportional representation in the elections in New York, yes, we did. He won. Benjamin Davis was a black communist elected to the City Council of New York.
That's right.
And what else was possible when they had a strong union movement and a socialist movement and a communist movement? You transformed the president. A namby-pamby centralist president, we would call him centralist now, balanced budget Roosevelt, was turned around. He found money, staggering amounts of money. In the midst of the Depression, he created the Social Security system. We never had that before. In the middle of the Depression, he created the unemployment compensation system in America. We never had that before. But best of all, in the middle of the Depression in 1934, he goes on the radio, this centralist president, namby-pamby fellow, a 1%er if there ever was one. And he says, roughly I quote, if the private sector in America either cannot or will not provide jobs for the millions of Americans who don't have them, then the only option is for the federal government to do that. And between 1934 and 1941, Roosevelt created and filled 12.5 million jobs. My goodness, my goodness. We now live in a time when we have a serious economic problem, and not only is there no federal jobs program, there isn't even a discussion of one. My goodness, how far we have come. All those things were possible. Corporations were taxed for a lot of the money to pay for that. Rich people were taxed for a lot of the money to pay for that. That's right. Roosevelt said to them, you better pay me those taxes, you corporations and you rich people. Because if you don't, and if you don't give me the money to make things better for the mass of people, down the road are coming the CIO, the socialists, and the communists. They're going to cut you a much worse deal. And half of them bought it. But then, in my humble opinion, and here's the moral issue, the CIO, the socialists, and the communists made a fundamental strategic mistake. They endorsed Roosevelt, who became the most popular president in American history. Won re-election 4 times. No president had ever done that before. It so freaked out the Republicans, they immediately had to pass a law after he was dead so that nobody could do that again. But here's the mistake. They got Social Security, they got improvement, they got jobs. But they didn't touch the organization of the capitalist enterprise. They left the shareholders and the boards of directors in position. So no sooner were the reforms passed, no sooner were the regulations passed, no sooner was the social welfare created, than we left in place the boards of directors and shareholders, for whom these are all obstacles to profit maximization. And they went to work over the last 40 years to eradicate, to undo what had been done, and they mostly have succeeded. Emblematic, the Glass-Steagall Act, the banking control that was referred to earlier. Banks should not mix depositors' money with risky investments. They worked to undo that. And finally, after years, they succeeded. They got the Congress to get rid of that law. And in 1999, President Clinton signed the law that repealed it. And 8 years later, wiped back down into a financial crisis, as if a critic of capitalism like me had written the script. The lesson here is our moral problem and a moral agenda item. If we don't want to continue to have a system that poses 1% over here and 99% over there, that plunges people into debts that are beyond words, that are now burdening an entire generation of college and university students with a debt burden before they graduate, impossible to carry, that gives so much money to so few that they can easily buy the political system with all its consequences. If we don't want that, there is no option to what we have learned. We must deal with and change the capitalist organization of our producing enterprises. No more masses of people here and a tiny handful of shareholders and boards of directors over here. 1% of shares in the United States, 1% of shareholders own 75% of the shares. To allow our business enterprises to be controlled by shareholders and boards of directors is a fundamental denigration and denial of democracy. If we want democracy in our lives, we are a peculiar people. Most of our adult lives is spent 5 out of 7 days a week, most of the hours of those days, at work. If democracy is a value, it ought to begin in the workplace rather than in our society being exempted at the workplace. I think, in conclusion, that our history teaches us that we are once again where the people were in the 1930s. Are we going to try again to develop a movement along the lines that my fellow panelists have spoken about so eloquently? And let's suppose Occupy is the first step, as I know we all hope it is and will be. We must learn from the mistake that was made last time, not for this or that improvement, but for the kind of change without which any of the improvements we can achieve will not be secure. The moral issue I would add to the agenda for the future is, finally, after 50 years when it was taboo, and thanks to Occupy, capitalism has once more to be put front and center as something we are free to criticize, something we are free to debate, and something which we as a society have to have the freedom to determine may no longer be what we need or want. Imagine an Occupy a year from now raising the slogan, America can do better than capitalism. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Brother Wolff.
Thank you,
Wow.
thank you, thank you.
Lord have mercy. That's powerful. That's powerful, man.
Powerful.
Oh, you laid that out. You laid that thing out.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I think we ought to move to the demos here. Yes, that was rich. Boy, that was rich. You got that on tape, right? Yeah, right on, right on. That's cool. That's cool.
In a moment, I'm going to introduce Stefan Said to you, but before that, let me offer to you a way to use the time of art history, this inwardness that the music and that word will bring to us, which is, we're going to turn and ask you now to turn to one another. And right in your pew, turn around so that you're really in small groups that can hear each other, because it's going to get loud with people talking. I encourage you, as you listen to others and speak with others, to enhance in yourself a curiosity to find out what happened to her. What has happened for him in the experience of these extraordinary openings of the moral agenda of our times. So listen, become a listener, and when someone asks you, become a speaker and learn from your own conversation with others. We're going to use these cards too, because I want to remind you, I'll say it one more time as we close this evening. We would like those of you who are ready to ground your experience here in something more, who want to continue, to leave your contact information with us. You'll just rip the bottom part off your card and leave it with us. Also, you have contact information on the card that you can take with you, and you may take some notes. I'd like to tell you a brief story about Stefan Said. I met Stefan only 3 weeks ago as he called me and said he was conceiving with others a worldwide way of recognizing the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King, with a vigil to take place at 7 p.m. in every time zone across the world where people could be assembled in that. Here in New York, we gathered at St. John the Divine and held the candlelight vigil. Stefan's vision for a worldwide testimony to peace and nonviolence came alive with extraordinary rapidity and excitement and energy. We got to know him and heard his music that night here just a week ago tonight. I ask you, Stefan, to bring your song to us again. Thank you.
How are y'all doing? I'm just going to sing one song. I'm really happy to be here. I don't know how many of y'all were here last Sunday, but not only Occupy, but the Arab Spring in Cairo, over 70 cities in the world, we made history. And we made history because we gave an answer that incorporated almost everything that everybody here has been speaking about. And that is that we thought, we don't want to just honor MLK. We know, and we'd already been talking about since October, that what we need to do, not only for Occupy, but for all of our movements worldwide, is raise high the light and the dream of that more equal world that people have been talking about and hoping for thousands of years, that we now know is imperative to the survival of our planet and for international security. It was simple. It's not even a progressive agenda. It's common sense at this point. And so we put it out on the internet, and within less than 2 weeks of organizing, it was all over the world. From, you know, I called up a friend of mine, an artist, Kanan, some of y'all know. I mean, I Facebooked him within half an hour, totally down. Deepak Chopra made a video lighting a candle in the name of it. This is where we have to go. It's not only an American issue. I'm half Iraqi. My family's been getting bombed for 20 years to sustain an unsustainable global economy. So we know what we have to do, and this song is just for our inspiration on that road, and the hope that we actually keep or get our hands back on the real plow, and that is for a movement that is defined by what we're for, not what we're against. And what we're for is that more equal world everybody's been waiting for thousands of years. So this is called Take a Stand, and it's a great honor to be here, y'all.
We are honored, brother. We are. Oh.
Here comes the cacophony, polyphony, the great big symphony. Bright light shining through the night of misery. Song ringing around the world about unity in hip-hop, folk, rap, rock, punk, country. We all know that we're all one family, couple billion leaves growing on the same tree. All we ever wanted was to be free. Could someone please help me with some harmony? Cause I wrote a little song you can sing along. With words so easy it won't take you long. No matter how you sing, it can't go wrong, cause the melody's easy and the backbeat's strong. It's okay, it's okay. We gonna make it to the day together. Take a stand, take a stand, take a stand. In every land, cause we all want the same thing. Just to be free, so take my hand and take a stand, yeah, take a stand. Y'all can get up and move if you want. Last Sunday, everybody was up in the whole place dancing and clapping their hands. Well, this one's going out to my brothers in the hood, cause I always knew you would. This one's going out to my family in Iraq, holding out hope while the big bombs drop. Going out to my blood in Israel, we never get to heaven through the gates of hell. Argentina, Venezuela, Mexico, Todos Santos in Bahia, San Ranchero. To my West Virginia home in the hills so high, I hope I'm in your arms on the day I die. Africa, America, Europe, Asia, Australia, let the spirits start flowing in the air. Well, it's alright, we gon' make it to the night together. Take a stand, take a stand, take a stand. In every land, cause we all want the same thing. Just to be free, so take my hand and take a stand, yeah, take a stand. When I got up this morning, I was feeling so free that all I want to do is go and sing about how we could all live happily. Would someone please tell me what's got into me? It took a cacophony, polyphony, a great big symphony, bright light shining through the night of misery. Song ringing around the world about unity and hip-hop, folk, rap, rock, punk, country. A little you can sing along. Words so easy, it won't take you long. No matter how you sing, it can't go wrong, 'cause the melody's easy and the backbeat's strong. It's all good, it's all good. All we ever have to do together. Take a stand, take a stand, take a stand in every land, 'cause we all want the same thing, just to be free. So take my hand and take a stand, yeah, take a stand, take a stand, take a stand. Take my hand, take a stand, yeah, take a stand. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
What's supposed to happen after that half hour? Are people supposed to come back?
You're going to come up here and talk with one another for a little while.
I'm going to drink that.
Yeah. We're going to have turn and talk for about 20 minutes now. Our panelists are going to come down and listen. And when the 20 minutes are over, they're going to come back up here and they're going to talk about what they've heard from you. So obviously this is a different kind of a laboratory than the kind of public event which people were accustomed to, where it's all about listening only to them. Now they're going to listen to you, and then we're going to hear a little more conversation, and we really are going to end at 9 p.m., just as we said. So I invite you. I see some people have already left. We understand. And there's a football game on, I'm told. But good for you. We're in the real game here. Turn in your pew and begin to talk. Here's a couple of questions to get started with. What happened to you, you'll say to someone who's just 3 feet away from you, what happened to you tonight here? What began to seem possible? What commitment is emerging for you? Turn and talk. Learn from one another about that, and we're going to learn from you. Okay? Thank you. Beautiful.
We go down.
So beautiful.
We leave and talk for a while. We go down, give him a couple minutes.
Do we go down? I think he said we go down.
Yeah, I think we go down.
I guess somebody switched it.
The good thing is the guitar.